Okay, Mike, hello.
Hello again.
Um, this this whole new section that we're going to be looking at now is less about you as a person and your experience and the work that you've done and your biography, as it were, your autobiography. We're now going to start looking in greater detail, although you've touched on all kinds of things throughout our talks, but in greater detail about the way in which you tend to work and how that has evolved over the course of your career. And I suppose the first thing I wanted to say was, I think I've said at some point that I first encountered your work late 70s, I think it was, in the ICA. And then I was lucky enough to be in Sheffield working as an actor when you came up with Cymbeline. And I got to know you and I got to know some of the actors. And I was fascinated by the process that you worked in. And I saw Cymbeline and I remember thinking this was the most pellucid, clear, and wonderfully magical Shakespeare I'd ever seen in my life. So I became a Mike Alfreds groupie, basically. Um, and Mike, one of the shocking things that I discovered because my career as an actor had been that I'd been blocked all the time. You move there, you'd say the line here, blah blah blah. I mean, various degrees of blocking, as it were, but nevertheless, you kind of set your performance by the time you got onto the stage. To discover that those actors were moving around like they'd never been told where to go. And in the end, you wrote a book called Different Every Night, suggesting that the performance that we were seeing was different every night. Now, to me, that sounds just like completely anarchic, indisciplined, free for all. These actors can just do what the hell they like all the time. Am I right in thinking that they're just allowed to do what the hell they like?
Oh no, no, it is an incredibly tough discipline to find the freedom because you're always working within a context, which means you're always working within a structure. And you have to know what that structure is and recognize your freedom within the discipline of the structure, which we can go into in more detail. For example, if we're working on a play by a writer, not a word is changed. That text is sacrosanct. That's what the writer wrote, and that's what I want the audience to hear. But how the actors play those lines is totally up to them in the moment of playing it on any particular rehearsal or performance. Yeah? Uh, and as I'm sure I've said, I, I did a very long tour of a production of the Seagull, and I went with the actors quite a lot of the time, most of the time probably, so I saw the majority of the performances they did. They must have been well over 100. It could have gone up to 150, I don't remember. And almost every night, the actors found new elements in the play, new scenes, new moments. Nothing seemed stale. I mean, sometimes the shifts were very delicate. Sometimes they were huge, really big. The shape of the stage and where they all were was different. People would sit in different groups and different, combinations. It was, that was very superficial, but it justified what I was doing and told me what I already instinctively knew, that there's no one way of playing a line or a scene or a moment. And in fact, any moment has an infinity of choices, and that an actor has worked in rehearsal seriously with the director, and they've tried different things and then said, that's great, keep it. And then you have to keep repeating that one choice seems to be very insulting to the actor's creativity and very reductive. When you know that behind that one reading, there are an infinite number of readings.
But,
Uh,
but but Mike, I'm going to interrupt you because you know there is a logic sometimes. Let's say you've got a sentence. There's a logic to the sentence. There is a right stress and a wrong stress, surely.
yes, I agree with you totally, but you've worked on that. But even if the stress is there, the color, the energy, the tempo of it, you know, can vary, and maybe the logic isn't always quite so clear with certain lines.
Mm.
You know, I can say, I don't think you should go, or I don't think you should go. And that choice might have been changed by something that happened earlier in the scene, the relationship, with somebody wanting to push their ego. I don't think you should go.
Mm.
You know, but I don't think you should go.
Mm.
I mean, they're both emphatic, but they have shifts. I mean, so to say to it, as long as the logic is there, I mean, if they're saying, I don't want you to go, then of course it's rubbish. And I don't know if sellers suffer from this, but most librettists of operas in English, or the musician, the composers, they ignore the logic of a sentence. So you think, why are they singing in English? They might as well not be, because it doesn't mean anything at all.
Yeah.
No, that's right. No, there are certain things. So all the rehearsals, Peter, are to clarify what has to be, constant, and what is freedom. And the two things for me is, if you're not improvising a show, if it's got a text, the text is fixed. And probably the choice of objectives is more or less fixed, but not totally,
Yeah.
And then the other way of defining it to say, what are the rules of the game that we're playing in this particular production? Are we playing cricket or are we playing table tennis? If it's cricket, then we can't play table tennis. And if it's table tennis, we can't play poker. So for me, the actual journey of rehearsal is to discover and create and learn the rules of the world that you are inventing.
And that's one of the major things that you have in one section of your book. And we're kind of outlining here.
Yeah.
You've got the idea of the actors and you exploring a world and saying, like you said, what are the rules of this world? And you've talked about this in some of our other talks, about
Sure.
how the 30s thing, you talked a lot about Handful of Dust and how what are the rules of the way you speak, the way you hold yourself, all those things, and how does that affect you mentally, and what impact that has. So that's one area of work that I know that you spend a lot of time with the actors dealing with. The other one that you've just touched on there is what I think you call logic.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yes, it is. And it's an exercise I came to quite late on. And I did it because of working on Shakespeare, because I very rarely have the actors sitting down, certainly reading a text. With Shakespeare, I thought we've got to deal with the language. So first of all, I'd have them reading it just to make sense of it and sort of not worrying about the verse structure, although the verse structure does, affect the logic, but nevertheless to make sure they understood what it meant, you see. And I gradually applied this even to contemporary stuff, and scenes that actors didn't understand suddenly became clear because they were using the text properly. Because unfortunately, a lot of actors are so busy with feeling and personal stuff that the words are just there for them to use, and they don't study what they're actually saying, just in terms of pure grammatical, bottom line, common sense logic.
Mm.
So this is an exercise I do not at the beginning of the rehearsals, because it might lead the actors to think these were line readings, which they're not. I say, I want you to leave out any emotion, any overinterpretation. I just want the common sense, logical expression of those words.
And obviously some plays require a lot more, or not just plays. I do remember you saying that with Emma, for instance, that you directed, a lot of your energy and time was spent working out how on earth Jane Austen structures her sentences and
Well, yes, for the actors, because I thought, you know, it's pretty obvious, but they didn't connect up jokes. There's one person would say something, and then the other person would reply, and then that reply was a very wonderful bouncing off words that had been used by the previous speaker. And the actors didn't recognize this. So I had to go through it and say, when he says to the boom, boom, you know, when you reply, your bump is saying something about the boom. And if I don't hear that, I lose it too. And they were all going, oh, yes, it is for, oh, you know, even older actors, which surprised me. And so it's just saying, you know, I could kill you. No emotion, I could kill you. I've hated you since the moment I first saw you. That's the logic. I don't know why I haven't stuck a knife into you yet.
You're worrying me now, Michael.
You know, just you know, yeah. And no, because it's obviously loaded with emotion, you know, but the logic is that, and that logic has got to underpin everything. And then I say to the actors, once you know what the logic is, then you can do anything else with it. Because once you know the rules, you know you can break them. Do you know what I mean? Do you understand? And it's, and as I say to you, I remember doing the opening of The Seagull with a couple of Australian actors and going through the logic text. And oh, they said, oh, no, I understand. You know, were, instead of being so busy with, oh, it's Chekhov and mood and my feelings, they were two people having a conversation. Because I say to people, look, when you're doing Shakespeare, if it's not a soliloquy, you are having a conversation with somebody. You're exchanging information. You know, and the fact that it's written in blank verse is irrelevant. It's still a conversation. Even if I have a speech of 20 lines, it is still a conversation. I'm communicating to you and you're listening to that and then you're replying to my thing. And the fact that in the second line of this 20-line speech, I said something doesn't eliminate the necessity for you to reply to that when you have your own reply.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You've got to be, you know,
it's finding those connections between.
Connect the logic of, you know, saying. And of course, when you do that, Shakespeare is brilliant.
Yeah.
They're just brilliant. You know, the great writers are, they're brilliant. You know, it's witty and subtle and complex, but they're there and they're sitting there waiting for you to find. So that's become a discipline. And I was thinking, oh, I don't need to do it with modern contemporary plays, you know. But then even with those, it was very useful.
Okay, so we might come back to this, okay, because we're just giving an overview here.
Right, okay.
And we've talked about the world, we've talked about logic.
Yes.
And then we've got a whole load of stuff, and I don't know whether we just want to introduce the headlines at this point.
Yes. Well, again, what are the, you know, it's very important that if, and particularly if you're doing a play with a text, even if it's a modern play, even if it's the first performance of it or a classic play, to analyze it as clearly as you can and look at it as factually as you can to see what the writer has written. You know, and you have to take it apart, you know, to really see what's there, not what you'd like to be there, not what you think is there, not what's partially there, and I'll ignore the difficult bits that don't fit in with my idea, but to see what the writer has written. You know, so there's those, we can talk about character and the lists you make up for characters from this information. You also look at the structure, you know, what is the time span? How many different scenes are there? Is there You know, are the scenes very short? What's the language like? These are all telling you what sort of play it might be. You know, is it realistic? Is it very heightened in some way? And then you say, okay, it's going to be heightened in some way. What way? And you're working very hard to be specific during rehearsal. So I do all my preparation in great detail, so I think I know the play very well. But of course, I don't really know it till I get actors up working on it.
Mhm.
You know, but as far as I can tell, I've got all the facts. I think I've made reasonable conjectures about the possibility of the production from those facts without wandering off from them too much. Then I come to the first day of rehearsal, and the actors have done their own preparation too. And we say, look, I don't know where this is exactly going to go, but I have a sense it's going to go in that direction. And these are the main elements that we may need to explore, you see. And then we spend the rehearsal exploring those and finding out what works. And we discover what the rules are. We learn them by exploring.
Yeah.
Till things fall into place. And for me, that's a very creative, lovely, you know, that's what I love rehearsals for. You're inventing a world, you're creating a world with a group of other people.
But I mean, the knowledge I have of your work is that it is always rooted in a kind of rigor in terms of, you know, if I look at some of your scripts that you've marked, as it were, I remember I borrowed one at one point to look at. You know, you've got your units of action, and we'll look at that as a whole little sort of section. You action every single with the actors, you action every single part of that. You've got your facts, you've got the conjectures, and then you've got the character lists.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, then you've got all the stuff that we're going to talk about over the next few talks about the way in which you work with your actors.
Yeah.
But I suppose what I want to ask you, Mike, is if you can say in sort of 4 sentences the amount of work that you do before you come into a rehearsal room for the first time.
I think I do quite a lot. I assume that everybody did this, but I might be slightly exceptional. I do spend a lot of time. You know, I do all the character lists for all the actors, and that takes hours and hours and days and weeks to do. So, you know, I've got an information. I try to work out all the units. I make conjectures about the objectives. I don't fix them because I want to see what the actors have to say and so forth. And I look at the structures and I think, for example, with the cherry orchard, very early on in the first act, a lot of people enter. And in the last act, all the characters except one leave. And that seems to me the journey of the play. A lot of people arrive and then they go away. And what happens in between is why they go away. So it's very important for me to think, okay, if they're coming, if they're arriving, which side of the stage they need to.
You know, you talked about this in.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. Okay, right. Sorry.
You talked about that. Yes, about them coming from
yeah,
from the left and
they come in from the strong side and they leave in a
yeah.
weak way because of what's happened to them.
Interestingly, you talked about that in relation to your training.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes. So things like that. So you say, well, that's a structure. And now, where do the acts take place? What is the time gap? If there's a long time gap between most of the acts, which there is, say, in Three Sisters, years go by, some of them, you say, what does that do to the rhythm of the play? It means that the actors, lots of things have happened between the acts to the actors. If you're doing ghosts, it's all happening in a couple of days. Do you know? So the actors have got to function differently between, you know, and I've never heard other directors saying this or talking about this. I'm sure some of them do in different ways. But you're looking at the structures, all the overt signs that the writer has given to the play, the way they say. Is it in lots of little tiny scenes, which will give a certain rhythm? Is it long scenes? Three Sisters for me is very different from The Cherry Orchard, almost by another writer. The themes are the same, but in the Three Sisters, people all have long speeches. They talk about themselves endlessly. In The Cherry Orchard, most of it is very glancing, very quick. There's a few long speeches, but basically it has a totally different rhythm and energy. And you're saying, okay, if I'm living in a world where people are talking about themselves in a sort of long way, it's going to be very different from a world where people are running on off stage and so forth, you see. And that's got to be part of the discipline that we find, that, you know, the structures that the actors can cling to and interpret and make their own.
Yeah.
So
Okay, Mike.
it's also terribly obvious when I talk about it, but
well, it's the foundations, isn't it? I mean, in a way, it's the foundations of everything that then happens in the rehearsal room.
yeah, yes, it is, you see. And then you go with that group of actors and you make suggestions what they might do and try, and they go and explore for you and say, oh, I found this. And slowly, when it's working well, a world and the production will evolve very naturally. And then at the end of it, I think, well, that's the world we found. For better or worse, that's what we've found. I don't have an image, an end image that the actors have got to work to. I've got a starting image and a sense of where we're going. But, you know, it might be, I was saying, in this play, we're going to go straight ahead. And we start off, and in the middle of rehearsals, we find, oh, it's drifting. Oh, actually, logically, now I can see it's going over there. Right, let's go over there. Sometimes I think it's going to arrive there, and on very nice times, it overpasses it and goes further. You know, so, you know, you keep your options open, but you still got the discipline of the journey, where we're going and so forth. And the exercise is very specific. So it's not anarchic and it's not chaotic at all, you know, because every exercise the actor's doing is within a context. You know, they've got conditions. You do this, but even in a very free improvisation, there are still structures.
Okay,
You know,
good.
so that's it. And all these structures and exercises are to discipline the actor to the degree when they become incredibly skillful with those disciplines, that they don't have to think about them and they are totally freed. I mean, I suppose the obvious or an easy analogy is the concert pianist who all his or her life are practicing scales, working God knows how many hours a day with their technique, learning the piece, understanding it, growing with their skills. And then when they come to performance, I'm sure they don't think anything about their technique. They come on stage and they, you know, so that's it. And unfortunately, because actors have to work together and they don't have these personal disciplines they can practice by themselves, it's quite difficult for them. That's why, and this is a big bête noire of mine now, that actors aren't nearly as good as they could be. And because there's no clear way of evaluating what they can do. If you're a dancer, you have to be seen to be able to do certain things with your body in order to get a job to dance in a dance company. If you're a singer, you have to have certain, you know, abilities before you can progress. You know, you just have to. You won't be hired. But what do actors show you? You know, videotapes, and they, you know, and they walk and they talk and they emote like anybody else. So the skill of the actor is very, very much hidden. Yeah.
And also, of course, I mean, I think this is this is a longer conversation, but actors, it's very hard to practice on your own as an actor.
Yes, terrible.
You can do lots of vocal exercises. You can go to lots of classes. You can do physical exercises. You can read plays. You can do all those things. But actually, it's the rehearsal room where you flourish.
Yeah.
As an actor, whereas as a solo musician, you know, you can practice, like you said, 8 hours a day on your pieces.
Yes, and I think good actors do read plays. They do act. They do go to workshops. They do go to classes. That they try to, but um, not enough. And so, in a funny way, the right demands have never been put on them, so their own expectations aren't as high as they could be. You see, I think a lot of actors are lacking in craft. They've evolved ways of working. Let's say they've all been to a good training for 3 years at a good drama school, but the problem with that training for most of the time is that it gives you a little bit of everything. It doesn't have a theory or a principle of how one should work. So the actors, because they're young, they can't put everything together. They don't connect up the voice movement with the movement things and with rehearsal. I go to the dance. I go to my dance class. I go to my movement class. I go to my singing class. I go to my voice class. I go to my acting class. I go to my improvisation class. I go to my play analysis class, whatever it is, or history of theatre, and they see them all as separate things because they're being taught to them separately. And it's almost impossible for a young actor to be able to see, oh, I see when my voice does this, my body does, and affects my emotion. So they don't come out with clear techniques. And I've banged on about this before. I've done quite a lot of work in drama schools up to about 2 years ago. And I've worked with third-year actors doing one of the final productions. And they're lovely and they're talented and they're charming and they want to work. And I say, okay, play your objective in the scene. What's your objective? And it's not second nature for them because they were taught in the first year, and then it hasn't resurfaced. It hasn't been resurrected. And you see, because you have to keep constantly getting actors used to working in a certain way till it becomes second nature.
Stop there, Mike, because you've kind of introduced, I think, what should be our next subject, which is the idea of objectives. Okay.
Yes,
so I think you've given us a pretty good overview. I mean, you'll be filling in stuff as we go along, but let's bring this.
Can I just say one final thing, just to make clear? Why I work this way was becoming more and more dissatisfied with what I saw in the theatre and with my own work, because it didn't seem to have the excitement that I'd sensed when I was very young. And I thought maybe theatre has died. It's not necessary anymore. We've got television and video, and film and so forth. But I thought this can't be. And I did ask myself a lot of questions. And I tried to ask myself, what has theatre got that nothing else has got? That television doesn't have, that film doesn't have, so forth and so on. And of course, later on, video and so forth and so on. And you get the cliche live theatre. And I kept feeling what I was seeing was not live. It was just reheated rehearsals. It was sort of virtual reality, done very well, very slickly, and almost convinced a lot of people. And I thought, if theatre's going to be live and have a real life and vitality, it's got to be spontaneous and improvised, because that's how we function in life. We plan things, we have objectives about what we want to do, and I'll bring this into the objective discussion, but we don't know what's going to meet us along the way. You're asking me questions. I sort of know what I'm going to say, but I don't know exactly. And another thought may push itself in to my head quite out of a sudden, or, who knows? Yeah. Or there may be a technical hitch and we have to wait. Then we carry on. And I thought that's what theatre should be, totally in the moment, totally alive, with that very special flowing, fluent quality which it produces. So,
good. Okay.
All
right. We'll bring this one to a close.
All right. Yeah, okay. Good.
Talk in a second. Thank you for watching. And I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions,
underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.